This is going to be the first part of a series of conferences that are going to have a continuation, and it will take us throughout history to places that we may have never heard of and things that we have never heard of before. Now, this first part is about the mystery of the obelisks, but before we enter into the matter, I would like to present to you with some music to create the ambience first, to see and think about what the obelisks have to do with the music that we are going to hear right now. So let's begin. Well, as you have heard, we have passed through Egypt, to France, to Great Britain, United States, and even Rome. And these are the different places that we are going to go through in this conference to see to unveil the mystery of the obelisk, what it truly means, and also in future conferences we'll unveil the true origin. Does it really come from Egypt or is it from before? But we must start with the beginning, which is, what is an obelisk? So this is where we're going to begin. The obelisk was Egypt's most ancient symbolic architectural form, consisting of an elongated quadrangular column mounted on a small base slightly larger than the column's dimensions, the sides of which narrow to the top, terminating in a pyramidal point called a pyramidion. As you see, they say that the obelisk comes from Egypt. The sides were usually carved with hieroglyphic inscriptions indicating the name and titles of the king who had ordered the obelisk to be made, and the divinity to whom it had been dedicated, and the narration of the political or historical event in commemoration of which it had been erected. So firstly, we can notice that not only it can have a political reference, the obelisk referring to a king or a power, but it also has a spiritual link to a divinity which it is built for, to worship. The pyramidion was covered with gold, bronze or an alloy of metals, so that it glowed when sunlight shone on it. Or it could bear inscriptions in which the pharaoh worshipped the god Ra, Amun-Ra, or any form of him by offering him incense or wine. From a sculptural point of view, Egyptian obelisks were considered to be a form of menhir and were mainly built of granite, grey basalt or quartzite. It's curious this, because maybe most of us would have not related an obelisk with menhirs before, and we know that there are many countries that have these stone pillars in circular forms or in some certain shapes, but these also are representations of obelisks, they are telling us here in this article. The common word for the monument that the ancient Egyptians called tejen is obelisk, which is derived from the Greek obeliskos, meaning spit, dagger, spear, sword point, etc. This word tejen here is curious because in Spanish, tejen is to weave. And we will see that this has something to do with the obelisk as soon as we carry on investigating more. So let's move on. This is a reconstruction of the Sun Temple of Nusere, Abu Ghurab. An obelisk stands in the center of the temple as a symbol of the sun. So there is a link between the obelisks and sun worship. Also, we saw that they were divinities themselves, so divinities and also divinities referring to the sun. Origin of the obelisk. The oldest obelisks date back to the 5th dynasty, when the pharaoh was called the son of the sun god, a title that was added to the pharaoh's title from that time onwards. Well, they say here 2000, more or less 2400 years before Christ, but is it really that old only, or do the obelisks and their origin come from even earlier from that period? We will see this further on. At the beginning of this dynasty, the legend had taken hold that the birth of the pharaoh was the result of the union of the sun god and the queen who had given birth to him. The end of the dynasty saw the rise of the rival cult of Osiris, a god who had undergone death and resurrection. In this sense, according to the religion of Osiris, the pharaoh was assimilated to Osiris at death, and the royal heir, the incarnate Horus, was identified with Horus, son of Osiris. Most of us may say, well, I don't have any idea what they are talking about these Egyptians, gods and goddesses and so on. But we can see here that a certain relationship with a part of Christianity, death and resurrection. Anyway, the influence of sun worship left its mark on architecture, and this actually is a true point. If we know a bit about symbolism referring to sun worship, we can see it in many governmental architecture around the whole world, no matter the country we are in. Not only political buildings, but also in temples and religious buildings. The sun god was revered in temples in which his emblem was placed in an open courtyard. The ben-ben stone, a conical stone raised on a pillar forming an obelisk, a structure which in turn rested on a base in the form of a truncated pyramid. The ensemble, whose lines are not as slender as those of later monuments, is the origin of the stone spires. The first of this type of temple is believed to have been the temple of Ra at Heliopolis. Although this temple has disappeared, 6 pharaohs of the 5th dynasty built copies of it as annexes to their funerary monuments. 2 of these monuments have been excavated, although only the Sun Temple of Nusere at Abu Ghurab near Abu Sir gives sufficient data to get a true idea of its plan and details. So one of the primary sources of the obelisk, where they come from, is from this city, Heliopolis. The construction of obelisks proliferated throughout Egypt, especially during the New Kingdom, when these structures were often erected in temples in front of the first pylon, although they could also be found individually inside the temple along its central axis. It says they because not only in the temples you could find one obelisk, but there could be many of them. There could be various of these stone pillars erected to worship these gods. Significance of the obelisk. The obelisk column may be considered as an offering in honor of the sun god, and the pyramidion as the symbol of the sun's rays spreading as they descend upon the earth, in addition to their solar symbolism. They were sometimes dedicated to sunrise and sunset manifestations of the sun god Ra, although they may also have been related to some extent as a form of the two horizon mountains on which the pylons of the temples were modeled. See how it's curious that they were covered in a shiny metal on the top, on the pyramidion of the obelisk, and that was used to reflect the sun rays, receiving that sunlight to be able to spread it in all directions. As Ra was eternal, the obelisk symbolized stability and permanence, and all the powers of rebirth, virility, fertility, and creative force that the god possessed. Now, if we think of something long and pointy erected upwards that can represent fertility and creative force, what can come to our minds to what this is representing? Anyway, let's see the obelisks throughout the world. Modern obelisks there are in Chile, in Argentina, in the United States, and also here in Spain. Let's start with Chile, Santiago de Chile. This was an obelisk that some of our partners went to visit a few months ago. Now take a look at the obelisk, not only at the structure itself, I mean the stone pillar, but what is around it? Where the obelisk is placed, what is below on the ground? You see that there is a circular form, a circular shape around it. And also this is the same obelisk from another perspective. We can see that there is some water there beside it. What is this pond for? Is it only for the ducks? Or does it have another reason for it? Let's continue. Argentina and Buenos Aires. This is another famous obelisk of another size, quite bigger, isn't it? In the middle of this street. And also at the bottom you see this elongated circular shape, which is more oval-like. But once again we see this pillar located inside a circle or an oval shape. In USA, in Washington, this would be probably one of the most famous ones. I personally was here some time ago, and as you can see, this obelisk, which is gigantic, has once again a shape around it marked by these American flags. And in this image you can see how it was commemorated to George Washington, who was a Freemason, by the way. And once again, here is the obelisk from below, and you can see this circle around it. This symbol is repeated, and we must ask ourselves, why is it? Why are these gigantic monuments that are not cheap at all built in this manner with these symbolisms around it? And we can see them in different countries. And how come is it that this symbol erected to worship certain gods that apparently comes from Egypt, how come we can find them in the big cities of this world, and even in small cities we can see them also? So what relationship is there with the Egyptian worship in ancient times to these symbols, to these monuments that are built in modern countries to apparently make something pretty? Is it just a decoration, or is it something else? This is what we must find out about the mystery of the obelisks. And at the top you can see here the pyramidion, which this one is not covered in gold. Most of the modern ones that are built in modern times do not have that cover of shiny metal to be able to reflect the sunlight. And once again, we have the obelisk with this reflection on a pond of water. So we must ask ourselves, what is the relationship between this obelisk and the other in Santiago de Chile, for example, in Chile? They have this water reflection where you can see what is above below on the face of the water. In Spain, Zaragoza. This is not one of the most biggest cities, I would say, in Spain, but it is one of the important ones. And this obelisk here in the middle of this roundabout, you see that it's also surrounded by a circle with a star with many points, doesn't it? A many-pointed star, and also with this circle marked by these posts. Now let's see obelisks in cemeteries marking tombs, for example in the United States. This is a cemetery that our partners went some weeks ago or some months ago, and well, this man that is standing here by the obelisk, he's a quite tall man, and you can see how in this graveyard in this cemetery, the monument that's built here as the tombstone is quite big, isn't it? Now let's look at this short video. This cemetery is in Battle Creek in Michigan. Well, this obelisk that is in this cemetery is dedicated to the Kellogg's family. And there are inscriptions on the obelisk saying, well, Kellogg so-and-so, Kellogg so-and-so, the father, sons, the uncles, and whoever the names they are. But it's curious how John Harvey Kellogg, who was a Seventh-day Adventist, he started to get involved in Freemasonry and in things that are definitely, they don't have anything of divine. And his family was also immersed in this. This person, Harvey Kellogg, was a great physician, and he did an amazing work, but he started to introduce himself in things that are not correct. And he was warned about what would happen, and eventually it was a complete disaster. But as you can see, that these obelisks are also used to mark in tombstones in cemeteries, and if you go through certain big cemeteries in cities, you will be able to see these also as monuments marking them. We can see ancient obelisks also in Italy, in Turkey, in France, England, in USA, Egypt, and in the Vatican. Let's look at this one first, the Lateran obelisk in Rome, Italy. Here it is, obelisk of Theodosius in Istanbul in Turkey. This one was visited by our partners also some weeks ago, going there to have some research precisely for these conferences and future ones that will come up. Here you can see a stone marking as a memorial for explaining when this obelisk was built. And this is also one of the engravings on the stone of that time. Obelisk of Constantine in Istanbul, Turkey. This is one that's right next to the previous one that we've seen before. Although you can see here that it is in a good state, previously this was the appearance of this obelisk, but it has been restored. So for some reason they restore these things. It's something that they want to keep. The people that want to keep them as monuments, as public decorations, you could say, they have the importance to keep them in well state so they can still be there, so for people to visit them, and they can stay there as marking certain things in the cities. Let's take a look at what it says of the Obelisk of Constantine. The Obelisk of Constantine is located in the southern part of the Hippodrome of Constantinople in Istanbul, Turkey, next to the Column of the Snakes. With a height of 32 meters, it was built with blocks of stone. The exact date of its construction is unknown, although it is known that it was Constantine VII who ordered it to be restored in the 10th century. And it mentioned here before in this news in Wikipedia about the Column of the Snakes. So in this same Hippodrome of Constantinople, there was this obelisk, and there was also the Column of the Snakes, which is this one over here, the Serpentine Column. Actually they excavated because the ground level was lower centuries ago, but with time it has been, after construction and building, the ground level has been elevated, and they had to do this excavation to be able to recover the actual form, the true form of this obelisk, as we will see now that they call it also an obelisk, the Serpentine Column. There is an explanation here on this board where we will translate a part, and it says, "This is a bronze monument known as the Serpentine Column that survived to the present day from the Roman Hippodrome. While Constantine was establishing Constantinople, that is, the new capital of Rome at that time, he brought some of the monumental obelisks established to commemorate important historical events earlier, and with the aim of celebrating them in the Hippodrome to decorate the new city. One of these obelisks is the serpentine column, so they themselves are saying that this serpentine column, so a column, a pillar, but instead of referring to the sun is referring to a snake, but it is also an obelisk. So what relationship is there between the sun and the snake? Here we can see the head of, well, one of the heads, because it had 3 heads, this obelisk. Now, precisely this obelisk is right in the middle between these 2 previous ones that we mentioned. So if someone asks you what you feel when you think about a snake, I mean, there are people that maybe love snakes, but usually the snake doesn't give a good impression, does it? And also, most of us know that the snake is referred to a certain character in the Bible known as the devil. The snake, the ancient serpent. So it's curious, right? How the sun worship and also the worship to snakes, to Satan, have a relationship, and they're all in the same place. Let's continue. Here is another image. And let's go to the Place de la Concorde in France, in Paris. Here we have an obelisk which does have the pyramidion covered in gold to reflect the sun rays, and Cleopatra's Needle in London, England. Here is one of them, and another Cleopatra's Needle in New York, USA. So these obelisks have been, most of them, taken from Egypt at the times where there were definitely no huge boats to be able to transport these gigantic pieces of stone, not the boats that we have at least today, and they were transported from Egypt to these different parts of the world. That was a great amount of effort. So what was the reason for these emperors and these kings to transport these gigantic heavy pieces of stone to certain cities and erect them there? For what? Let's look at the obelisk of the Temple of Luxor in Egypt. Here we have it in front of this temple to Egyptian gods and goddesses. St. Peter's Square. Now this is the most known one, you could say, in Rome. So what is one of these obelisks doing in the center of St. Peter's Square in the Vatican? Let's look at its origin. In Karnak, Luxor and Heliopolis, Egypt, as we mentioned before. So the origin of this obelisk, the obelisk that is in the center of St. Peter's Square, was brought from Heliopolis, from Egypt. In ancient times, in older times, the Roman Empire brought it, well, the papal Rome brought it to the center of its square. It says here, Heliopolis, ancient Egypt. Heliopolis is the Latinized form of the Greek name Heliopolis, meaning city of the sun, Helios. The personified and deified form of the sun was identified with the Greeks with the native Egyptian gods Ra and Atum, whose principal cult was located in the city. Its native name was the Pillars, whose exact pronunciation is uncertain because ancient Egyptian recorded only consonantal values. Now, once again, we have the obelisks built and erected to worship sun gods, and also brought from the city of the sun, literally, and taken to different points of Europe, in this case, for example, in the center of St. Peter's Square on the Vatican. Its traditional Egyptological transcription is Yunu, but it appears in biblical Hebrew as On. Some scholars to reconstruct its pronunciation in early Egyptian as, well, I can definitely not pronunciate this, perhaps from older. Variant transcriptions include Alnu and Annu, the same survived as Coptic as On. So On is another one of the names known as this city, as we will see further on. Let's look at the obelisk of Sesostris I in Heliopolis in Egypt. Here it is. Meaning of the obelisk according to Freemasonry. So we have seen what the obelisk means according to ancient Egypt, and we will see further also different cultures. But now we're going to see what do Freemasonry believe that the obelisk is, because there was one erected precisely in commemoration of George Washington, who was a Freemason. So what do secret societies have to do with the obelisks and their erection in different parts of the world? Let's see the Masonic symbolism in the Plaza de Europa in Zaragoza, here in Spain. The obelisk, inspired by those of ancient Egypt, is 33 meters high, to which 2.5 meters of pedestal are added and made of marble and concrete. The figure of the obelisk is very important in Freemasonry, trying to emulate the greatness of the Egyptians, such as the white marble obelisk erected in Washington, D.C., one of the most emblematic for its height of 170 meters. See that they say that it is very important. The obelisk is a very important symbol for Freemasonry. This symbol is a pillar that holds the world. At the same time as it is a representation of the relationship with the divinity, with the apex pointing to heaven. The pillars are symbols of great value. The initiator of antiquity saw in the obelisk the true spirit of the god to worship. So, for Freemasons, it is also a meaning to worship a god. Now, which god? Because we know that there are so many different divinities and cultures and beliefs. Which of them are they worshipping? Interestingly, as we say, the obelisk of Zaragoza's square is 33 meters and its base of 2.5 meters is divided into 3 floors, with 3 steps separating the soil from the obelisk. Even in popular wisdom, it is known that the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite consists of 33 degrees. Number 3 is very significant in Freemasonry. For example, in the Masonic Temple, there are just 3 steps to access the east. So, once again, we see that for them, the number 3 is very significant, and we saw that the serpentine column, the one with the snakes, had 3 heads. That snake of 3 heads. So this relationship with divinities and the number 3 have something to do. They are linked together. And obviously this one, well, it's 33 meters high because of the 33 degrees of Freemasonry. So numbers for them are important, and they use them in their constructions in their buildings. And not only that, as we will see now. Orientation of this construction is also very relevant. The blades of the central cross, which clearly seem to be the symbol of the Templars, are oriented towards the 4 cardinal points. And besides, the adjacent gardens that indicate in these 4 directions are triangles. The triangle within the world of Freemasonry has multiple meanings and interpretations, as it is also a symbol present since ancient times in many religions. Now, if I ask you, can you think of a religion that maybe you've seen a symbol of a triangle with an eye in the middle? Maybe with some sun rays shining around it? I can think of one. And they say that this symbol of the triangle is in many religions. A very remarkable detail in all this environment that occupies us is that the rest of the construction extends to the west towards the Almozara. In other terms that we Masons use more, towards the west. So that the rest of the gardens, placettes and monuments that accompany the central square look towards the east. They are oriented, whereas we have seen the obelisk is located as the main construction. The same happens in the Masonic Temple, whose main focus of attention is the east, where the sun rises, where the light comes from, separated from the rest of the lodge, which is the west. So they locate their Masonic temples, and this is something that you can check. If you go throughout a big city and find a Masonic temple and you look out, you will see that they are directly oriented to the east. So there's a relationship with sun worship and Freemasonry. It says, to curl the curl more, we can say that if we draw a straight line from the aforementioned garden area, linking with the obelisk, and stretch that line just over a kilometer, that is, going even further to the east, what do we find? The dome of the Basilica of Pilar. So this obelisk, that if you take a straight line to the east, you will find that it is right in front of a basilica of what they call the Virgin of Pilar. But curiously, Pilar, also in Spanish, means pillar. And the obelisk also, we saw that it was pillar. The dome also has great meaning in the Masonic world. It makes a cosmic reference. It is a relationship between the macrocosms and the microcosms. That is, that it refers to both the world and the man. And the divinity that is predisposed to reach. A very significant example is the Capitol Dome, also in Washington, D.C. So we can see here this line that we can draw from the obelisk to the basilica. So the obelisk is pointing directly to the dome of the Basilica of the Virgin of Pilar in Zaragoza. But we saw also that in Washington DC, the Capitol is right in front of the obelisk also, and once again with the water reflected. So these are symbolisms that constantly are repeating themselves. The dome with the obelisk and the water reflection. So what does this mean? I know there's a lot of reading to do, but we'll finally find out, and the next conference will be much more didactical, more images. But the thing is that to be able to find out the mystery of the obelisks, we have to dig in and we have to pull the thread to find out what they mean for these people that build them and erect them, and also those that made them so many years ago. Another meaning of the obelisk, once again we can see the relationship. What can you see that is the same in these two images? The one in Santiago de Chile and another one in Washington DC. And also here, once again we can see the reflection of the obelisk in the water. This will give us an explanation. Hermes Trismegisto, as it's up, it's down. 3 times big. The name Hermes comes from the Greek god equivalent to the Roman Mercury, who had its essential function to be the messenger of the gods. The term Trismegisto means the threefold great, as it possesses the gift of triple wisdom, physical, mental and spiritual. Once again, the number 3. In Egypt, this figure was called Thoth or Daihuti. The similarity of these deities lies in the fact that the 3 move between the world of the gods and humans, made a bridge between 2 realities, the top and the bottom. Diodoro, a Greek historian of the 1st century before Christ, comments on Hermes that Osiris generally had him as his scribe and priest. To him he communicated every question and resorted to his advice in the vast majority of cases. For his part, Clement of Alexandria comments that the written legacy of Hermes Trismegisto would consist of 42 books, which existed in all temples dedicated to the goddess Isis, and also in the famous Library of Alexandria before it was destroyed. So another goddess is introduced here, Isis. Now what does Isis have to do? We will see her more, and we will see how all these gods and goddesses are related. And basically they all have the same symbolisms. Simply the name is changed when they pass on from one culture to another, from one tradition to another, from one way of living to another, from one era to another, but the symbols are the same. So how is this? And they are all related to the obelisks? It continues saying, the Jamnic Greek philosopher of Chalcis stated that Hermes is the rector of the word and inspiring of the initiates. Curious, because an initiate is what they call someone that enters a secret society. He is initiate. It is he who directs true science. He is one with everything, and therefore our ancestors attributed all the discoveries and put his works under the protection of the name Hermes. G.R.S. Mead, a writer who was a member of the Theosophical Society. Now, we spoke recently about the Theosophical Society in the conferences of the 2030 Agenda. I recommend to see them to be able to understand more about what all this is about. And definitely you will realize that the Theosophical Society is basically a spiritualist organization where all the practices they do have to do with spiritualism. They realized this man at the dawn of the 20th century an exhaustive study of Hermetic works, concluding that there would be still another Hermes, predecessor of the thrice great one, prior to the flood, and therefore prior to the sinking of Atlantis, which would explain the wisdom, science, and the highly advanced arts of primitive Egypt as a legacy of the civilization of the Atlanteans. And now you could say, well, this is complete nonsense. You're talking to me about the flood, about Noah's Ark and all that story? Well, yes, actually. We in our museum in Spain have pieces of fossilized wood that we can prove that, because we traveled to where the Bible says that Noah's Ark would land in the mountains of Ararat in Turkey. And precisely you can find there a formation of what seems as rock, but when taken to analyze to a laboratory, it is fossilized wood. And it has precisely the exact same dimensions as the Bible describes. And when it is scanned below, it has 3 floors. The radars show 3 floors of the ark, and also the piece that is at the bottom of the boat to be able to direct to be able to steer the directions of the boat when it is at sea. So the scans and the radars can actually prove that that is Noah's Ark. And this is something that we've shown in our conferences. We also did some interviews. It is open for everyone to be able to see them. To Mary Nell Wyatt, she is the widow of Ron Wyatt, who was the man who discovered Noah's Ark and many other discoveries. But anyway, that's another matter. So they are talking about a predecessor of this thrice great one, a God being, or someone that is referred to as a God before the flood that we all know as the flood of Noah's Ark in the Bible. And it says, there would be evidence of the finding of fragments of the books of Hermes in very ancient inscriptions, especially on the inside of secret crypts of the great temples near the Delta, not far from the Sphinx and the pyramids. For its parts, the Kybalion is a document that summarizes the 7 principles of Hermetic thought. It was written in the early 20th century by a group of anonymous thinkers, self-styled the Three Initiates. The most popular theory indicates that the Freemason Paul Foster Case, Michael Whitty and William Walker Atkinson could be the authors. The document calls Hermes the Great central son of occultism and God of wisdom. Well, if they are talking about occultism, something that is occult from the others, then definitely there must be a reason for which they occult that information from other people. So what kind of wisdom and what kind of gods are they talking about? It doesn't sound definitely anything divine or anything that you would want to approach if you have common sense. And it says here, the axiomas of Kybalion. Correspondence, as it is upstairs, it's down, as it's down, it's up. Demonstration on 3 broad planes, physical, mental and spiritual. So once again, we have the correlation between the opposites, up and down, and also the number 3. It says polarity, everything is 2, everything has 2 poles. Everything, its pair of opposites, the likes and the antagonistic are the same. So these are the symbolisms on which they are constantly moving around. Now let's see one more meaning of what the obelisk is. And this directly from this man here, called Albert Pike. We also mentioned him in the conferences of the 2030 agenda, precisely in the second one, if I remember correctly, about World War III and the end of times, basically. And he wrote also about the obelisks in his book. This book that he wrote, we'll see now, is basically one of the Bibles, or the Bible of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Now they discredit his work in some manner because, well, truly, there are some things written in that book that will not leave Freemasons in a good position if the common public would know what that book says. But basically, this man was born in Boston from 1809 to 1891, and he was a 33-degree Freemason. He is credited with a famous letter written on the 15th of August in 1871 about the 3 World Wars. Yes, 3 World Wars written in 1871, before even the First World War occurred. And he wrote in his book, Morals of Dogma, on page 393, this that we are going to see. Here you can see a symbol of a 2-headed eagle, with once again that illuminated triangle on top of it. This is a symbol of 33 degree of Freemasonry. This is the book, Morals and Dogma, and on page 393 it says, hence the significancy of the phallus, or its inoffensive substitute, the obelisk, rising as an emblem of resurrection by the tomb of buried deity at Lerna or at Sais. Remember that we talked about, well, I asked, what could you think of something long, pointy and erected that could represent fertility and virility? Well, he himself is saying it here. So the obelisk represents a phallus. Now, if you walk through a city or a square or wherever and you see an obelisk, would you think firstly that has to do with some worship or a phallus? Well, I don't think most people know about this. Even you could try and go there and ask maybe the police officer nearby and ask him, what does this mean? What is this representing? Why is this monument here and what is it for? Doubtfully they would tell you that it represents a big phallus. So why is this sex kind of symbolism represented in all the cities of this world? It says here in his book Morals and Dogma that it was referred to also this deity at Lerna or Sais. So let's see these deities who it is referring to. Lerna. In ancient Greece, Lerna was a region of springs and a lake near the eastern coast of the Peloponnese, south of Argos, where remains of settlements have been found from the Neolithic period to the Mimmithical period. In Greek mythology, it was known mainly as the lair of the Hydra of Lerna, the multi-headed Leinic water snake, a creature already of a long antiquity, when Heracles killed it as the second of his work. So once again we see this multi-headed snake that we saw at the Serpentine column in Turkey. So this deity, this god, is also worshipped by Freemasons, but also by Romans, but also by Egyptians. So once again, what is all the correlation between all of this? We'll have to try and find all the links. I know that as we move on, there are many things that appear up, and we will have to bring those matters back together so that we can continue this line of information and we can arrange and organize all these ideas to see where this is going to take us. Because as we carry on talking about the matters of the obelisk, we see that constantly new subjects and matters open up that will have to be dealt so that it all makes sense. Lerna was one of the entrances to the underworld, and the ancient Lernian mysteries consecrated to Demeter were celebrated there. So once again, another goddess is mentioned. Let's see, Demeter. The identification with the goddess Isis, so Demeter is referred to also as Isis, and these goddesses are also linked to others, as we will see. Why are they all belonging to the same symbolisms? The goddess Isis lies in the fact that the two must undertake a search. Their daughter Cora in the case of Demeter and her husband Osiris in the case of Isis, producing in both cases a paralysis of life in the wild by the arrival of winter in one case and by the end of the flood of the river in the other, until the encounter takes place and nature reborn again. Subsequently, the Greco-Roman priestesses of Isis had to be formed in the Eleusinian mysteries according to the model of the priestesses of Demeter, the Canephors. Her assimilation of the Phoenician goddess Astarte, once again another goddess, through Isis, was facilitated by the commercial relations between ancient Egypt and the Phoenician city of Byblos, since according to Egyptian mythology, she would find the chest with her husband's body in this ancient city. Albert Pike mentioned Lerna, but also he mentioned Sais. It says, is the Greek name for the capital of the fifth noma of Lower Egypt, located to the west of the Nile Delta. It was the royal residence of the 26th dynasty, known as the Sate. Its tutelary deity was the warrior goddess Nate. Its name in Egyptian is Sa, while in Arabic it would be Sa el Hagar, meaning Sa, the rock. And it refers here that the oldest settlements in the region date from 3,500 years. This is a literal translation. It would mean BC, before Christ, not after Christ. The city was visited and described in the midst of the 5th century by the Greek historian Herodotus of Halicarnasso, who mentions constructions such as the royal palace, the temple of Nate, a sacred lake, obelisks and statues. So once again, another goddess. We mentioned Isis, we mentioned Demeter, we mentioned Astarte, and now Nate. And in this place worshipped to Nate, they also have this sacred lake where we could see the reflection of the obelisk, and obelisks themselves and statues. And it says here, worship in Sais. Sais was one of the main venues for the celebrations linked to the coronation or jubilee of the pharaoh, the Feast of Thirst. Many dignitaries of the Old Kingdom were priests or priestesses of the goddess Nate, a demiurge whose origins are traditionally located in Sais. Nothing remains of the temple of Nate proper, and it is difficult to get an idea of its splendor and extent. The most that can be done is to list the elements that belonged to it, such as the obelisks that adorned it, one of which, the obelisk in the Piazza della Minerva, was erected by Apries and is now in Rome. So once again, the obelisks that are dedicated to certain goddesses, in this case it refers to Minerva, which Minerva is nothing else than Athena also, and this was transferred to Rome once again. Now, what's the obsession with the Catholic Church, at least the Vatican and its leaders, to bring these obelisks, and also the Roman Empire did, to Rome itself? It says here that Herodotus describes in particular the great temple of Nate, adorned with a drone of sphinxes, pharaonic colossuses, obelisks and porticos with palmiform columns. Now, palmiform columns, this is something that will come up further on also, how certain symbols also have the palm tree in them, and how the palm tree is also related to all of this. Let's see the goddess Nate. It says, Nate or Nath is an ancient goddess of war and hunting, later creator of gods and men, funerary divinity, goddess of wisdom and inventor of Egyptian mythology. Egyptian name is Net, and Greek name Nate, as Greek deity Athena, because Athena is also represented as the goddess of war and wisdom, and she is also represented with a spear in her hand. Iconography, it says the woman with the red crown of Lower Egypt with bow and 2 arrows, or an owl. Why an owl? Athena is also represented sometimes with an owl on her shoulder. Maybe you can think of a certain secret organization, secret society, that its symbol is an owl. That will come up also further on. And a spear or a weaver's shuttle. What has sewing, what has weaving have to do with all of this? She was also represented as a beetle, a bee, cow, fish with the head of a lioness, and sometimes breastfeeding a crocodile. Also another woman maybe you can think of that sometimes has a certain dress or cloak that has bees on it. Mythology. Nate, also called Tehenut Libyan, is an ancient Egyptian goddess whose cult comes from the pre-dynastic period, in which it was beetle-shaped, then was goddess of war and hunting and inventive goddess. Mother of Sobek in the ancient empire, considered Pharaoh's protector and identified with the bee. It also protects Osiris and Ra with their arrows that numb the evil spirits. Well, actually, if you take a look at what we've been reading, it seems quite evil itself, doesn't it? And she is supposed to protect from the evil spirits. Well, it seems that she is an evil spirit herself, doesn't it? It says that in the New Kingdom she becomes the mother goddess, to be androgynous. It says that she is creator of gods and men who fathered the universe through 7 arrows or 7 words, because it was also said that she created through the word, with which she raised the original hill. In the Saith period, she is a national goddess and will be proclaimed mother of all the gods. Maybe there's a term that we might have heard before, the mother of God, referring to the Virgin Mary. Now, is it the same to say mother of Jesus, to say mother of God? I think it's quite different, isn't it? To say mother of Jesus as a man, or to say mother of Jesus as God, mother of God. That means that she is above God. That's what Nath here, this representation is. The mother goddess, creator of gods. In her funeral aspect, she is a protective goddess of the dead, the one who invented the fabric, so she becomes patron of weavers. Now, we will continue seeing what this has to do with all of it. But remember the weaving shuttle and the shape of the obelisk, what do they have to do with it? This is an image of the goddess Nate that you can maybe find it more familiar. And we have been seeing obelisks related to gods, but also goddesses, referring to Nate, Isis, Astarte, and so on. So what is this relation between all these gods and goddesses with the obelisk? Still one more meaning. As the obelisks were also a symbolism of the erect male organ, the phallus, around its base there may be a circle, which in turn symbolizes the sexual act in coitus. And we've seen that in all the obelisks that we've been looking at, right? They were always erected in a circular shape or an oval shape. But still more. Nath. Let's read a bit about her. She assumed the position of a goddess, neither male nor female, and both at the same time. She was the principle that creates gods and men. Well, I'll skip this, there's a lot to read. Let's go to this part at the bottom. A text by Plutarch taken from the Temple of Nath that says, I am all that has been, all that is, and all that will be. No mortal has ever been able to lift the veil that covers me. So here it is saying or denoting that there is something to uncover. To who is Nate? Who is this goddess? Was it maybe a person that truly existed? that is not some fictitious character that has been invented to be able to make people worship some idol at a temple? Or was she actually a human being at some point of time? Here we have the obelisk of Washington inside this shape, which is a vesica Piscis. As you can see, there is the circle, but also there are two bigger circles that are overlapping one each other, and they create this mandorla shape, the shape of an almond seed. And it's curious because there are so many Catholic images where you can see the Virgin Mary inside this mandorla. Now, what does it have to do with this? Well, they are representing here, firstly, sexual act. And also we talked about this in previous conferences in the 2030 Agenda, how there is a certain sex worship that these gods promoted in ancient times, and that Freemasons are also worshipping this cult today in modern times. It's the same ancient cult brought to a modern culture. Well, here's the image again so that you can see it more clearly. Definitely, this is a quite impressive monument because you can see it practically from any point in Washington. And finally, we have at the left obelisk in Heliopolis in Egypt and the obelisk in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. Can you see the symbol that's around the obelisk? We have this 8 radius, this 8 cross, this 8 pointed cross, and it's both in Heliopolis and it's also in St. Peter's Square. So why is the same symbolism in the sun city of Heliopolis and also in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican? And this symbol, this 8 pointed cross, as you would say, is also the solar disk of the sun god Shamash. So why is this symbol represented in so many places? As we said, sun worship is in architecture in all over the world, and it has influenced most of the governmental buildings also. The sun is a giver of light and life. A news item from 2016 shows a discovery: when the sperm reaches the ovule, a flash of light is produced, which will eventually generate life. It seems consistent to think that the ancients knew about physical and astronomical matters that are beyond us. This is quite curious. The magic spark that occurs when a sperm fertilizes an egg. I'm going to skip the article and we'll go directly to the video where you can see this precisely happening, and it's quite impressive. Pay attention. Well, it's quite curious to see how precisely the moment where the sperm enters, there is a flash of light. So how is it that the ancients knew about this when they did not have apparently the technology that we have today? And I say apparently. Obelisks cited in the Bible and destined to a specific cult. The Adventist Bible Dictionary comments on the word obelisk. Now let's see what the word obelisk means. In this case, it's matzeboth. This is the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Dictionary, and it will give us a description. It says obelisks. An expression occurring once in Jeremiah 43:13 in a passage predicting the breaking up of occult objects in the Egyptian city of the sun, that is, Heliopolis. Masseboth are stone pillars set up for worship or as monuments. Jeremiah most certainly refers to the many obelisks that in ancient times stood in the great temple of the sun in Heliopolis. One of these obelisks is still found on its original site. This, well, we'll not continue. One of these obelisks is still found in this site that we saw before, that it had the same symbolism as the St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. And it says here that they are stone pillars. We'll skip this and go directly to here, Masheha. It says here, pillar, mastaba, stump, pillar as a monument, personal memorial with an altar, And it says here, parts of the prayer, trunk, stump of a tree. Now, curious, because it says here, mastaba. Mastaba, that can sound to us maybe like masturbation. I mean, now I know that it can sound gross, but this is the things that they are referring to. This sexual worship cult. And we can see that even precisely in the original name, in the origin of the word obelisk, it has a relationship to do with this. So there is a correlation with the root words, the root origins and meanings of the words to what they mean in the future, although they do not sound alike. Obelisk, in Hebrew in plural, it's matzeboth. And curious because Semiramot, in Hebrew Shemiramoth, has the same root word at the end. Name heaven from the heights exalted. Some consider it as a parallel of the name of the queen Samuramat, which is Semiramis. So what has Semiramis have to do with the obelisk? Well, it has a lot to do with the obelisk, and we will talk a lot about Semiramis to see if she really existed or not as Neith. And it says here in the outline of the biblical use, it says obelisk as signal, distinctive brand, flag, remember, miraculous sign, omen, warning, ensign, banner, miracle, test. Curious to see, what does Semiramis have to do with a miraculous sign or something like a warning, an omen? We'll have to find out maybe in future conferences, because we cannot compact it all in one, obviously. But this is something that we will continue investigating and showing how this will take us to places that we may have never thought of, and all starting with the obelisk. The Strong Concordance uses the word hamanim for images of the sun, obelisks, as these references 2553, 535 and 525. The first one, it says Haman, from 2535, a sun pillar, idol or image. And this takes us to Hama from 2525, which means heat, by implication the sun, heat and sun. And this comes from Ham from 2552, hot, hot and warm. It's curious because at least here in Spain, when it is said that someone is hot inside, it is when someone is looking for sexual intercourse, basically. And we have seen how the sun pillars have to do with sex worship, but also in its roots name, which is Ham, which maybe even ring a bell to a certain character, is also meaning the same thing. And here are the biblical texts where the obelisks are cited, sometimes with the words we have recently seen. I'm not going to read them all, but it's just so that you can have examples of that it is not only one biblical verse, there are many of them. It says here in Exodus 23:24, "Thou shalt not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do after their works, but thou shalt utterly overthrow them and break in pieces their pillars." So God in the Bible was mandating his people to destroy these monuments. Instead, you must break down their heathen altars, smash the obelisks they worship, and cut down their shameful idols. What are these shameful idols? "But you shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and cut down their Asherah poles." These shameful idols were the Asherah poles. Now, what are the Asherah poles? Well, we'll have to refer to a Bible dictionary once again. Asherah, it says, Asherah or Asherim and Astaroth, they are referred to groves in the King James Version. And the Phoenician goddess of vegetation is Asherah, called Atrit of the Tyrians in a Ugaritic text. Ugaritic literature refers to her also as the Lady of the Gods, the Mistress of the Gods, and as the Mother of 70 deities, but her most distinctive title is Asherat, Lady of the Sea. In the Aman letters, she appears by the name Ashirtu and Ashratu. A Canaanite temple of the 18th or 17th century BC, thought to have been dedicated to her, was excavated at Nahariya, about 5 miles north of Akko, close to the seashore, where here were found many figurines of doves. So this place, a temple dedicated to Asherah, they found many doves like figures of little doves. What has the dove have to do with this? You'll see that there are different symbols that come up, but they are all correlated. The thing is to find the links that join them together. A silver figurine of a goddess, small offering vessels, and fragments of incense burners, all of which reveal the character of the cult practices in Asherah worship. Asherah was the female counterpart of Baal, and her worship seems to have been especially attractive to the Hebrews. Her cult image was set up and worshipped in Jerusalem as well as in Samaria, probably in the temple of Baal. So there is a union between Baal and Asherah. But we were seeing also about these goddesses that, or gods and goddesses, that did not have any, they were neither masculine nor feminine, but they were androgynous. And this one is a union between of them too. It's referring to Asherah and Baal are both a counterpart, and female and masculine, they're the opposites. A cult object symbolizing Asherah, when the goddess of her cult image is not meant, the word Asherah refers to a wooden pole or tree trunk, which stood in Canaanite sanctuaries, dedicated to the goddess as a symbol of vegetation. The cult object was made, planted, or set up, could be burned, cut down, plucked up, or broken into pieces. See the trunks on the Elamite model of an open-air sanctuary. So in the Bible, it is referred to how God's people were mandated to destroy totally all of these sacred pillars, be them the stone pillars, or be them also these tree trunks to Asherah. It didn't matter if they were to Baal or to Asherah, but this kind of worship had to be stopped and destroyed. And these are, well, some of the many Asherahs, basically. As you can see, she is apparently she's a woman that loves herself very much, because in every one of them she can't stop touching herself. So you can see once again the relationship between sex cults, worship, and these gods and goddesses. So what were they really promoting, basically? Leviticus 26. It says, "Ye shall make you no idols nor graven image, neither rear you up a standing image, neither shall ye set up any image of stone in your land to bow down unto it, for I am the Lord your God." And there is one after another after another. It says, "Burn their graven images with fire, cut down their Asherah poles." Once again, "Burn their Asherim with fire. The Lord God hates them," and etc., etc., etc. And under every green tree they did these worships to these gods, where they planted these Asherah trees. He broke in pieces the pillars, and as you can see, there are many of them. Let's focus on this one. It says, "Nebuchadnezzar shall break also the images and obelisks of Heliopolis called On, or Beth Shemesh, house of the sun, in the land of Egypt, and the temples of the gods of Egypt shall he burn with fire." So the Bible itself refers to this Heliopolis, city of the sun, as it said here, called On, that we read earlier, and a supposedly Christian religion grabs these obelisks and transports them from Egypt, from this place, the city of the sun, to Rome itself. As we saw before here, Egypt, the ancient Egypt, the city of Heliopolis, was also named as On, as we just read in the Bible. And it continues talking about this Asherah poles as the image of jealousy, which were also, at some point of history, and the actual temple of the Jews. So this kind of worship was involved even among the Jews, and it was basically contaminating everything. Now these are the Egyptian obelisks in Rome and in the city of Rome and the Vatican. We have one here, the Lateran obelisk, that was brought there by Pope Sixtus V, the Flaminius obelisk, Solare obelisk, the name says everything, obelisk of Makoteo, Dogali obelisk, Mateian obelisk, obelisk of Esquiline, and also all of them brought by popes or mandated to be erected there by popes themselves. We have here obelisk of Minerveo in Rome, and it says Alexander VII in 1667 moved it and placed it in front of the Church of Saint Mary sopra Minerva, basilica built on Sopra, a pagan temple dedicated to the goddess Minerva. So they bring it and put it on top of what was in other times a pagan temple, and the Catholic Church builds their own temple on top of an ancient pagan temple, and then brings a pagan obelisk and plants it in front of their own temple, which is dedicated to Saint Mary. Remains of a temple to Isis are also there, and a serapeum have been discovered below the level of the present basilica, and the buildings of the preceding convent. In 1665, an Egyptian obelisk was found buried in the garden of the Dominican cloister adjacent to the temple. So they even found an obelisk buried in that place where they built their own basilica. In future conferences, maybe we'll talk about the Dominicans and about what their true work was. And it says here, the phrase engraved on the pedestal, these symbols of the wisdom of Egypt that you see engraved on the obelisk holding an elephant, the mightiest of all animals, are proof that a strong mind is necessary to sustain solid wisdom. So they are saying that a strong mind is needed to be able to sustain this amount of wisdom. But what wisdom is the one that they are sustaining? What kind of wisdom? Because this doesn't sound good at all, does it? And this is the one in St. Peter's Square in the city-state of the Vatican. As you can see, it is the central piece of the square in the Vatican. Here it is once again. These were images taken by us. And it says here, it was moved from Heliopolis to Rome by Emperor Caligula in 40 AD. Initially placed in the Circus of Nero, later the Church of Saint Mary della Febbre was built in the same place, moved to St. Peter's Square in 1586 by Pope Sixtus V. The inscription on the base of the obelisk, translated from Latin, reads, "This is the cross of the Lord. Flee, adversaries, triumph the Lion of the tribe of Judah." On its pyramidion is placed what they say is a relic of the true cross. They call it the mute witness because the Apostle Peter was crucified upside down before it. Well, they say it's a relic of the true cross, but I don't think they don't even believe it themselves. But anyway, here it is. This is the difference between the other obelisks that we've been seeing. They just put a cross on top of it, and then they've sanctified it, apparently. The obelisk of St. Peter, the monuments that had to be exercised. So now obelisks and monuments can be exercised. Well, that's curious. The obelisk in St. Peter's Square rises in the center in the shape of a pole. Its history led a pontiff to make the decision to exercise it. Let's see why. As early as 1586, Pope Sixtus V had the obelisk moved to St. Peter's Square as a silent witness of the martyrdom of the apostle, founder of the Catholic Church. Well, founder of the Catholic Church is what they say, that the Apostle Peter is the founder of the Catholic Church. But truly the Bible does not say the same thing. When Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church," he's referring to himself, he as the rock, not Peter, which is the little stone or the pebble. It is said that upon seeing it mounted on the center of the square, Sixtus V exclaimed, "What was pagan is now an emblem of Christianity." Subsequently, a golden cross was placed on the pinnacle and an exorcism was performed to purify it. And that's it. We just changed something that was completely pagan to something apparently Christian. It should be noted that obelisks were an extremely important part of Egyptian culture from the ancient empire until the end of civilization, and most of these were erected in honor of the sun god Ra. Once again, already in the 16th century, for its transfer from today's Vatican Hill to St. Peter's Square, the obelisk of St. Peter was protected with a wooden structure from which 75 horses were pulled to tilt it, put it in a horizontal position, move it and straighten it, since it weighs 300 tons. 907 workers were also involved. As it stands today, the obelisk of St. Peter is 131 feet high. And this is an image of a description that was made of this moment when they had to move this obelisk from one place to the other and then erect it to have it in a straight position. Imagine the amount of effort done at those times to be able to do this. And the thing is that there was a curse, you could say, on top of all those people that were working there. And because the Pope said that if the obelisk fell and it broke into pieces, all of the people, all of the workers that were involved in erecting the obelisk into its new position were to be executed. So it does not sound anything coming from God at all, does it? If it has to do with precisely the lives of hundreds of people. And here you can see in these images how this work was done to be able to erect it in the position that it is today. Right in the middle of the capital of, well, basically the Vatican, which is the headquarters of the Catholic Church. So it is also, this place, this obelisk, a matter of the zodiac, where the center is the obelisk as a symbol of the sun. Here is the center of this square with the 8 rays of this sun symbol, as we saw before in Heliopolis, and how it is also referring to sun in astronomy and astrology.
Que podemos comprobar, fijaos uno tras otro, luego vienen también los vientos. Esto hace un extrarradio impresionante que marca, una vez más, como ya vimos en esa primera conferencia, un centro absoluto que es la adoración al sol. Todas va en consonancia a lo mismo. Como ya sabes, el sol es algo más que adoración al sol. Mira, no es fuerte, ¿eh? Vamos llegando aquí. Tenemos, mirad que pone aquí, centro del coronato. Seguimos con las cuestiones solares y así hasta el final. Esta plaza está muy bien diseñada.
Well, as you've seen, the obelisk and the square is marking certain points where there are solstice and equinox. So there is also referring to terms of astrology and astronomy with the obelisk using it to mark this point. And this in the square of the Vatican. So obelisks were associated with the cult of the sun god and also to Nimrod and Baal. Nimrod, maybe you've heard of this character, we will have to talk about him also. Some Masonic researchers suggest that the word obelisk literally means the shaft of Baal or organ of Baal's reproduction, once again referring to the phallus. And knowing this data about the obelisks, it is evidence that they have to do with sexual intercourse and the generation of life, with this union of the two poles, the two opposites would be Baal and Asherah. Consequently, solar worship generating all pagan worship that has been handed down since ancient times. Because, as we've said here, that for some Masonic researchers suggest that the word obelisk literally means the shaft of Baal or organ of Baal's reproduction. Also for the Egyptians, it meant that it was the phallus of the sun god Ra. So basically they are the same gods in different cultures, but they all have the same symbolisms. The only thing that happens is they change the name. So the gods that they have, that people may have today, certain ones, do they have a relationship with ancient gods in all the times? We will continue with these conferences, and I know there's been a lot to read, but this is going to serve us to be able to open the box of Pandora, as you could say, with a lot of information that we'll have to join together and put together this puzzle so we can find out where this information is going to take us. Why is there so many obelisks around the whole world? Because if you live in a big city or in a medium-sized city, you will be able to see them there. And they are erected in these places for some reason. So why is it that people in power in this world, and certain religions like the Catholic Church, have this strong interest in erecting these monuments in different parts of the world in these cities, and with certain concepts and symbolisms that refer to things that definitely have nothing to do with the divine? Well, thank you to all of those that are supporting this ministry so we can continue doing this work. And on the next conference, we will continue with the unknown origin of the obelisks. This is where we will finish showing what this relationship has to do with the obelisks and these gods and these deities, what it has to do with modern times today, and then we'll have to enter directly into the matter of secret societies. Because as we've seen, secret societies, Freemasonry and others are also involved in the obelisks. But what does the Catholic Church have to do with secret societies? Because they are also related, as we have seen. So is the Catholic Church related, and it is involved in these occult societies that they say govern this world? Well, this is what we will find out in future conferences. So I invite you to continue seeing them, and till the next time.